Hi there, folks, and you guessed it, today we'll be talking about J.R.R. Tolkien. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien. More specifically about the Silmarillion. For those of you who don't know, the Silmarillion is the book in which he basically lays the foundation of the world, of Arda, Ea, and all that jazz. Covers most of the lore, so if you're wondering, like, what's Gandalf? Well, covers it in the Silmarillion. Why can he fight a Balrog? Well, they're both on the same power level, so... Great book to read. I highly recommend reading at least the first two chapters, the Valaquenta and the Anya Lindale. Explains a lot. You'll get a lot from that. Anyway, so I'm going to keep this video relatively simple. Don't know how long it's going to go. Hopefully under 10 minutes. 2 parts. We'll have a summary of the Silmarillion up through chapter 11, which is where Theodore, we'll talk about him, takes part in the first kinslaying and makes an oath that forebodes much of the rest of the tragedy in that book. So, up through there we'll summarize a lot of, how Middle-earth and everything came to be, Valinor and Middle-earth, the 2 big continents in Arda. And that'll just be a good summary to give you some kind of context for the second thing I'll be discussing, which is themes. The themes that I will talk about, there's 3 or 4 of them. They're definitely present in the Silmarillion, and even more so in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. So, and then I'll make sure to connect those to real-world situations, just so, they're not just completely fictional. They have a real-world meaning. And then to preface everything, I would like to mention that this is a summary. In no way, shape, or form can 10 minutes do this any justice. I'm doing the best I can to give you kind of a context to talk about the themes that I wanted to talk about. And then another point to preface all this is speculation. Tolkien is notorious. A lot of the stuff he writes about, he doesn't care if it goes over your head, which is part of the joy of reading his books over and over, is you start to pick up new stuff every time. So a lot of this is speculation and how it speaks to me as a person. So without further ado, enjoy. In the beginning there was Eru, one who was a Iluvatar, and there was nothingness. And he was like, man, I really want some people around me. So he made a symphony of creation. In this symphony, he created the Einar, lowish level angels. With them, he shared the plans for the coming of men and elves into existence, aka the children of Iluvatar. Dwarves were made by one of the Einar, which I may or may not get to. One of the Einar was named Melkor, and just from that name, you can make some assumptions about this fella. He wanted to make a symphony of his own, and he became discordant from the symphony of Eru Iluvatar. No coincidence, he was one of the smartest of the Einar and most powerful, and his music did happen to attract some Einar to his side, like the Balrogs that we will see at some point. Well, this happened several times, and finally Iluvatar was like, okay, stop that, we're done, no more of that. Then Iluvatar has a vision of creating an Earth, Arda, and he shares this vision with the other Einar, and they're like, that's pretty cool, it'd be great if that could exist. Him being Eru Iluvatar was like, alright. Hence the creation of the Earth. Arda. One who was Iluvatar has created Arda, the Earth. He was like, hey, Einar, you can descend here if you want. You can reside here. This can all be yours. But you gotta stay there until it's doomed and dies. And so some of the Einar are like, that sounds like a good deal. So 15 of them go. No surprise, Melkor was one of those 15. So there's many years of basically the Valar are creating and shaping the world at this point, and then Melkor's just destroying it and trying to covet and create for himself because he's a pissy panda. During this time, the 2 big continents emerge, and I'll throw a map up here. Valinor is in the west, Beleriand in the east. Look at the map. Got that? Good, it's all sunk in. So some things and stuff happen, and then boom, elves happen. Arome, one of the Valar, says, elves, come on over to Valinor, we'd love to have you. The elves that go become known as the Eldor, the ones that stay become known as the Avari, the unwilling. So no surprise here, Melkor's like, oh man, smells like elves, so he's like, I can't have that, this seems like a golden opportunity. Begins capturing, torturing, changing elves. This gives rise to some of the orcs, which are just basically tortured elves that have their wills broken and changed. We'll see that that's a huge mistake anytime you dick with the creation. Again, obvious parallels to the Bible. One of the biggest things Satan did was try to dick with the creation. So no surprise here, Tolkien, among other Valar, go over there, beat his ass, drag him back to Mandos. Mandos is essentially basically the Hall of the Dead, where anything that dies resides before going on or staying in the case of elves, because they don't actually die, they just stay in the Hall of Mandos until they are reincarnated. So now that the elves are in Valinor, we can begin with Theodore. Alright, now that Theodore is here, we can take this to the end of chapter 11 called The Flight of the Noldor, which is where I will finish the summary. So Theodore is born. When he is born, his mother, wife of Finwë, pours all her love and compassion that would have nurtured many other sons into Theodore. Like I've said, elves don't die, they become reincarnated. Well, she died. She poured everything into him, hence the reason he was so awesome. Cannot stress this enough. Theodore is probably the most badass elf there ever was. He's great at everything. He was the bee's knees. And he really, really loved his father, Finwë. We'll talk about that later. And if you want to see a big map of the lineage thus far of the elves, here you go. Try to decipher that. It's pretty deep. Anyway, so Theodore is great at crafting things. Eventually he makes something called the silmarillion, which he borrowed the light of the two trees created by the Valar. The point is that he took something of the Valar. You don't need to know about the two trees just yet. These silmarillions, imbued with the light of the trees, are basically his downfall. They're more enticing than the One Ring, and basically the love for these silmarillions and the want to possess them, we'll talk about possession being a theme here, leads him to do some grimy stuff, namely threatening his brother and then making the first weapons, like weapons meant to harm, not tools. This gets him banned from Valinor, and his dad, Finwë, comes with him. Now, wherever he's residing, it tells you, I'm not going to look up the name again, but Melkor catches wind of this. At this point, Melkor is freed. They let him out. I don't agree with it, but the Valar are apparently men of their word, or Valar of their word, whatever. So Melkor catches wind of him, and he goes over there, and he's like, man, I think you should give me the silmarillions. He's not that sly. He jumps the gun a little bit in trying to weasel them out of him, and he basically mentions them by name. Theodore hears that and just shuts down immediately. Theodore hates Melkor. He's the one who named him Morgoth. So Melkor is also known as Morgoth. So Melkor gets shut down. Well, he comes back eventually, ends up stealing the silmarillions and killing Finwë. This takes Theodore's world and turns it upside down. Everything he loved is dying around him, and this leads him to make the biggest mistake he makes, which is making the oath. Oaths in the world of Tolkien are a big deal. They're not just people saying shit. They're an intention. They have meaning. He makes an oath, and I'm paraphrasing it, basically saying anyone who keeps these gems from us will die. So basically what that does is it dooms everyone who makes the oath, because they're basically saying, looking for the silmarillions out of a desire to possess them, which is never good, especially in Tolkien literature. And then anyone who covets them or likes them or desires them is going to be murdered by these people. So that pretty much has screwed them all. So he decides, I'm going to go over to Beleriand, go over to Middle-earth, rule over there, away from the Valar. So he's also chasing Melkor, because he's seeking Melkor, the one who currently has the silmarillions. So this leads him, and he talks to some other elves, gets them on board with him. He's Theodore. They're going to listen to him. He's a smart old elf. So he gets some other ones, and then he needs to get across the sea. He needs to get to Middle-earth. So he talks to the Teleri, a sect of elves. Now, the Teleri are excellent shipbuilders. Now, this is what happens. He gets there, and he's talking to the Teleri, and the Teleri are like, I don't like what's going on with you. We're not going to let you use our ships. Theodore, being Theodore, is like, that doesn't sit well with me. He gets the elves that he has to kill basically all the Teleri, take their ships, and cross over. He left some people behind, too. He left some of his own behind. It's just kind of a testament to the ruthlessness that resides in him now. Once they got over there, they burned the ships, which is more spite out of anything, because the Teleri, just like Theodore poured himself into the silmarillions, the Teleri poured themselves into making their ships. So that's basically where we'll stop for the summary. Again, the chasing of the silmarillions and that oath that they made sets up the backbone for the rest of the stories about death and dying in the Silmarillion. Now that you have a very, very brief background of the Silmarillion and the world of Tolkien, well, at least you understand who Iluvatar is at this point, you understand who Melkor is, you understand that elves are now in the world. Now we can begin going over some of the themes. Keep it simple. I have 4 ones for you. I'm going to give a brief summary of them now, then go over them in depth in a minute. First one's context. Basically, 2 people can do the exact same thing, but with different reasoning. The reasoning means everything, basically. Context to what you are doing. Hole in the hearts of men is the next one. Basically, we'll talk about when they were created, when men come into the earth. Again, I didn't discuss that in the summary. We'll cover it here. They were created with a sort of quote-unquote hole in their hearts because their destinies are not of this earth. It lies elsewhere. So that's why they're always hungry and seeking and greedy. Third is fighting the natural order of things. Again, I'll have to really get in depth on that one, but basically anytime you tend to fight the flow of how things are supposed to be, bad things happen. A degradation of sorts begins to happen. And finally, I'll talk about mortality versus immortality. Both of them are gifts. That throws off some red flags. Let's talk about with context. Context, as we will see, is massively important in Tolkien literature. Two people can do the exact same thing, and depending on the reasoning, one can be considered quote-unquote good, and one can be considered quote-unquote bad. A great example of this is Auli and Melkor. As you know, Melkor made his own chorus, his own symphony, because he wanted to create and subjugate. That was why he wanted to create something. He wanted to have dominion over it. Auli wanted to create something also. In fact, he created the dwarves. But Eru saw this, and Auli's intentions were he didn't create the dwarves to have power, to have dominion over something. He created the dwarves because he wanted to share in the joy of creation. He didn't make them out of spite for Eru. They say that imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and Auli was imitating to reflect Eru. He wanted to feel that. He wanted to share in that. So an example of two people doing the same thing, but judging by the context, one can be considered good. A further example is Felagund. He is a king of elves. He is prevalent throughout the Silmarillion, but he's real big in where it actually meets his doom in the story of Beren and Luthien. Now he is a king, and just like many other kings, he has power and he has possession. What separated him, what became the good context, is that he was able to let go of that possession, to humble himself, to bring himself down to help Beren and Luthien in their escapades. So the big thing behind context basically is, what I'll close out with is reasoning in the Tolkien literature seems to be almost more important than the action, to have a good, just reason. Moving on, so the next theme is fighting the natural order of things. Now for this to work, I'm going to need to submit to you that there is a flow of time. There is a flow of events that occurs according to the will of Eru, one who is Iluvatar. Now when you fight the flow of time, a decay happens, and this decay is moral and physical. And all the creatures in Tolkien's world are subject to it. To prove that, even the hobbits are subject to it. And we see that in some of the Hobbit, actually. And, you know, they're in their little town, and they're not just drinking a little or eating a little. They are getting hammered. They're gluttonous. You're seeing this decay begin to happen. Now, towards the end, these things start to crumble, but at first you really see this decay begin to happen. You know, you hear tales of them stealing and stuff. So just a good example that all creatures are subject to, even the ones that seem innocent. So a good way that this is symbolized is usually by a fortress. You know, any walls meant to separate yourself from the rest of the world. The separation occurs, then possession occurs. You separate yourself and you say, this is mine, stay out. You're trying to isolate yourself and keep everyone else away. We see that textbook in Lord of the Rings. Pretty much anyone who holds on to any of the rings or the Silmarils. Almost everyone. Frodo, to give you a good example, you know, what does he do at the end of the Fellowship? He tries to separate himself. He tries to leave. Whether it was on good grounds or not is up for debate, but he tries to leave, and then the possession of the ring just becomes worse and worse and worse. So, any walls built to keep others out will always crumble. A good example of this, a good reverse example of this is actually Minas Tirith. In the final battle of the Return of the King, you see them leave Minas Tirith, and that is the only reason that that place did not crumble. They did not use it to cower behind, to separate themselves and pray for the best. They went out to meet the enemy, and that is why Minas Tirith didn't actually fall. So the lesson at hand here is that there is a destiny, a flow of events, if you will, and to fight the changing of the world is to condemn yourself to basically die, fade, and decay. Alright, so on to the next theme, the hole in the hearts of men, quote unquote. So this one's definitely more relatable to us, you know, you and me, we're all human. And I'll jump right into this one. So Eru created men, and their destiny was unknown even to the Valar. The strongest quote-unquote species in Arda has no idea what men were meant for. So this hole in their hearts leads us to always be seeking and never filling it. Well, another good YouTuber liked to call humans the get shit done species. Now, this always seeking and never filling allows us to do a lot of good and a lot of bad. It's the motivating force, because we're trying to do all this stuff to fill this hole. Now, elves are a little jealous of us because our destiny is beyond Arda, and that's what the emptiness is. That's what we're trying to fill. Our destiny it can't be filled by anything of this earth that lies beyond. And that's why the elves are kind of jealous. You know, they live, they die, they get reincarnated in the halls of Mandos. They are subject to the change of the earth until it is no more. They don't get to leave. They're jelly of humans because we get to die in great triumph or great sadness. Either way, we're not in this gray area and we move on. So elves are a little jelly of that. And I think the obvious parallel is, I mean, we're all humans. You know, Tolkien understood this, and I think he made it. This was a good example of explaining that yearning we have in our lives. You know, we're always looking to fill this void that we have in us. Some people turn to addiction, drugs, food, whatever. And I think winning this battle is about understanding that nothing of this earth can fill it. Our destiny lies beyond this earth, and in understanding that we can overcome this problem. And I really think he did a great job of explaining this yearning we have, and I think he did it in a very beautiful way. And the last theme, mortality versus immortality. Now, the gift to men was mortality. We were finite. The gift to elves was immortality. That throws off some red flags. How can two opposite things be considered a gift? Let's talk about it. So I made two little charts that you're not going to be able to see, but don't worry, I'll talk about them. For immortality, the pros and cons, and then mortality, the pros and cons. So, immortality. Let's go over the pros first. I only have one. I'm a little biased. The number one pro of immortality is immortality. You get a long time. You got lots of time to get stuff done. However, the cons, and this is from the perspective of elves in the Tolkien world, they linger. They don't. Their lives are devoid of great triumph or great sadness. They simply just linger on. They can't leave Arda. They like men, their destinies are meant beyond Arda. They just simply live. They die. They're reincarnated, and they're sent back into the world. They can't leave. They're destined to fade as the world fades. So, like, their power, they just get to see themselves slowly wither away. Hence the reason they're going over the sea in the last Return of the King movie. They're going to Valinor because their strength is fading and they're falling from Middle Earth. So now, to mortality. What are the pros and the cons? We're going over the cons first. Biggest con, again, I only have one because I'm a little biased. We don't have much time. The lives of men are short. That's just how it is. That's mortality. What are the pros of this, though? We get to leave Arda, first off. Again, the elves are so jealous of that. They're jelly AF. We get to leave. We don't have to. We're not bound to this earth, the fate of the earth. We have our own destiny separate from it. And the biggest one here is that our choices have meaning. We'll jump right into this. With this finite amount of time, every choice we make permanently shuts off other choices we could have made. And this is why it's so important. This is why we're given mortality. Our choices have weight. They have meaning. I can only love so many people with the time I'm given. And loving some people, you permanently shut off relationships you could have had with others. You're making ripples in the water that you can't change, but will permanently affect your life. Our choices have weight, and that is the biggest benefit of mortality. We have a finite amount of time. But it is a beautiful thing to be able to pull meaning from the sentience, to understand that our choices are beautiful and that they permanently change our lives with every single one we make is a beautiful concept. But there needs to be, it's not all sad, you know, we can't be sad that we're finite. We need to have this appreciation for our sentience. And in a way, there's a Japanese theme, and it's called Mono no Aware, and I believe what it basically means is a happiness for something beautiful underlined by a small sadness that you know it won't last, which is a perfect metaphor for our lives. You know, they're beautiful, they're filled with beautiful, gorgeous things, but they don't last. But there's beauty in that because our choices have meaning because of that. So I guess the call to valor is literally just that, a call to action. We only have so much time to do what we need to get done, and we need to do it. You need to make the best of the time that you have here because it is so short. So to sum up this theme about mortality versus immortality, I guess what we can translate the elves' gift to is their gift is time. They have time, not immortality. The gift of men isn't mortality, it is weight of choice. The mortality gives our choices meaning. Alright, I thank you all so much if you made it this far into the video for watching this. It was a bit of a nerd rage. I thank you so much for following me. So this has been a quick, quote-unquote, quick dissection of the themes and a quick summary of the Silmarillion. And there's nothing really more to say, except I will see you all on that next one. And to my Tolkien nerds out there, Gura Naru Adrathadvi.